LML4807 student. Today we provide you with feedback on your assignment 2. Your assignment related to credit law. We provided you with a set of facts where we had Michelle as the car dealer who sold a VW Polo to Anthea, and Anthea then entered into an agreement with Goliath Bank to finance the purchase of this VW Polo. The material terms of the agreement between Anthea and Goliath Bank were as follows. There's a principal debt of 150,000 Rand, which will be paid over 60 months with equal monthly installments, and those installments will be interest bearing. Then the bank may increase or decrease the interest rate by the same margin as in accordance with how the bank changes its prime lending rate. Then also Anthea was requested to provide a PIN, that would be her online banking PIN, so that the bank could access her bank account to make sure that Anthea could pay this installment. And then lastly, the VW Polo, or the ownership of the VW Polo, remains with Anthea until she has fulfilled the obligations in terms of this agreement. Now we use this set of facts then to request specific questions relating to the set of facts. Now, before I move on to the next slide, just keep in mind that the feedback we give to you is just a general guidance. And while we were marking and we saw there were aspects we might not have included on our memorandum, we gave careful consideration then to each individual assignment. Now, our first question asked, does the National Credit Act apply to the agreement between Anthea and the bank? And if it applies, what type of agreement am I dealing with? Now, can you see in the question that I've highlighted agreement? I don't tell you credit agreement, so you're going to probably have to identify in the question whether this is a credit agreement or not. If you've done so, then we ask you, if I have this type of credit agreement, does it fall under the NCA? And if it falls under the NCA, what type of credit agreement would we be dealing with? So do you agree that there's technically 3 aspects of this question you have to answer? And that's also why it counts 10 marks. Okay, firstly, we ask you to identify this agreement, and from your knowledge, from what you've read, you know that we might be dealing with a credit agreement. So you now have to test if we have the 2 elements present to confirm whether this is a credit agreement or not. In your question, we talked about deferral of payment because we told you Anthea is going to pay back that amount in monthly installments. So there's a deferral of payment. It doesn't happen straight away. It happens over 60 months. And then secondly, we also told you that Anthea is going to pay interest on that installment. So here we then know there's definitely interest charged because there's a deferral of payment. So you tell yourself, aha, these 2 elements are present, so I definitely am dealing with a credit agreement. So that's your first part of your answer that you should have come up with. Then we move on to your second part. In your second part, we then know now it is a credit agreement. So now we're going to see if the NCA applies. So you remember that in all of your legal studies or your studies throughout your LLB, you need to tell the person which section applies to a specific answer. Now in this case, you would use section 4 of the National Credit Act. And you know that section 4 tells you that the National Credit Act applies to every credit agreement. Remember, you've already established this is a credit agreement between parties who deals at arm's length and has an effect within South Africa, unless there's a specific exception that applies. Now, in our question, we don't mention anything of it being an external agreement outside of South Africa, we don't mention anything about an exception which applies. So you can assume that Section 4, in this case, tells you that the NCA would apply to this specific agreement. In any event, you know, or you can assume that Anthea in this case is an individual to which the NCA would apply, unless we've told you otherwise. Then we move on to the third part. So now, to recap, we've established it's a credit agreement. We've established the National Credit Act applies. So now the third element that you need to then tell us would be, what type of credit agreement am I dealing with? And again, immediately you know Section 8 of the National Credit Act would apply here. And you'd need to tell us now, what can this be? So list. It could either be a credit facility, a credit transaction, a credit guarantee, or a combination of these types. Now, a bit of a hint. You will see that in most of your questions, there's always a clue to tell you what type of credit agreement we are dealing with. So if a question relates to a credit card, you immediately know we're asking a credit facility. If a question relates to an installment agreement like buying a car, you immediately know we're dealing with a credit transaction. A credit guarantee would then obviously be where there's some mention in your question about signing surety. Now, because you've already identified that we are dealing with an installment agreement, you need to go and check whether you comply with the elements of a definition of an installment agreement. So the first element, there must be goods bought on credit. And you immediately know, aha, yes. What am I buying? I'm buying the VW Polo on credit. Then your second element, the purchase price must be paid in installments. And again, you say, yes, this is present, because the question told me we had 6 equal installments through which Anthea would have to pay back the principal debt. Then next, we have the question of whether the seller would retain ownership of the goods. And remember, in our question, we specifically told you the bank remains the owner of the vehicle until Anthea has fulfilled her obligations. Now, in this case, it would obviously be that she paid back the principal debt through the 6 equal installments along with the interest which was due. So now can you see you've answered question 1, doing it a bit or part by part. First part telling me whether it's a credit agreement. Secondly, telling us whether that agreement falls under the NCA. And thirdly, telling us the type of credit agreement, and in this case it was a credit transaction, but it was an installment agreement. And then going through your elements of what would be required to have an installment agreement, and then applying it to your set of facts. See, if you follow this recipe, you can't go wrong. Now, question 2 asks from you whether the contractual term providing for the interest rate was valid. And it's a resounding yes. A contractual term which relates to the interest rate that it can be amended will always be valid. Now, in the agreement, it makes reference to the interest rate being linked to the bank or bank's prime lending rate, which you in any case know is usually linked to the Reserve Bank repo rate. So a clause like this will always be valid, and you probably came across this when you bought your own vehicle as well. Easy 3 marks. Then the last question you asked from you, where we include a term that Anthea must give her PIN to the bank. So that's a PIN on a bank card to ensure that payment is made towards this installment, whether that would be valid. And immediately you should have said no. Any contractual term that obliges Anthea to provide her PIN and bank card to the bank would be unlawful. So we would also give you a mark where you told us that unlawful provisions are void. So see, this is an example where at the beginning I told you we use our discretion in marking your assignments. If we see there's a slight deviation from the memo, but you're still correct or your law is still correct, we award your mark. And then you'll see this question only counted 2 marks. So see how we can combine different elements of the National Credit Act in a question. It can be that we give you a set of facts and then we ask some theory related to that specific set of facts. Or we can give you straightforward theory. The great thing about this is there's so much that we can ask and test on, but unfortunately this means you really need to study this lesson very, very well before you enter the exam, so that you are able to know where you need to go to find specific answers to the questions we ask. Again, as with the previous lectures, we provide our contact details. If we're not answering our telephone, please send us an email, as we tend to respond quite quickly to your emails. All of the best with the preparation for your examination. We trust you've enjoyed the semester, and also let us know. We've tried a new method to give you feedback on your assignments, so that it also adds a bit of a personal touch to the presentations. So let us know that you enjoy the lectures and the way in which we gave you feedback for your assignments, and do you prefer us continuing with this method? All of the best.